So 2020-6 is a policy that deals with what we're calling swap transactions. It's something that has been occurring that registration services has been allowing but hasn't been codified in policy. So we've been going back and forth about how exactly we should include that in NERPM. So basically what happens is you have an organization that has a larger block of space than they really need. Say they have a /16, for example, but they're really only using maybe a /19 or so of it sort of interspersed throughout the block. What happens is an organization that has a need for an entire /16 comes and if they have some extra space lying around, or if there's another third-party organization that has an amount of space that's appropriate for what the organization that's holding the /16 has, is that organization will receive a transfer of a smaller block, renumber onto that smaller block, and then transfer the larger block to an organization that actually has need for that space. Can we go ahead to the next slide? And the next slide after that. And basically this policy enables more efficient utilization of space and allows for single prefixes to be announced rather than a bunch of smaller pieces being in the routing table. Next slide. So we're still working on the current text. We've gotten some feedback from the community, but it's sort of tapered off over time. So in this meeting, we would really like to have some feedback on a couple of key points so we can figure out exactly how to modify the text to make sure it fits with the desires of the community. Next slide, please. So there are sort of three main issues that are being considered right now. Right now, there's a question of whether or not there should be a cap on the size of the smaller block that's received in the swap transaction. So this is the smaller block that the organization that's holding too much space would receive transfer of, renumber onto that smaller block, and then transfer out the larger block. Some numbers that have been thrown around for that are a /19, a /18, or just making that based on needs justifications. So the way that would work out is if we just ignored the utilization of the larger block that they're not fully utilizing because they're going to be transferring that out anyway, and then base the size of the smaller amount of space that they can receive on what they otherwise would have been able to qualify under needs policies. The next sort of issue that we'd like some feedback on is whether there should be a cap on the amount of time that organizations have to finish the renumbering project and swap out the space. We've been looking at 12 months, 24 months, or no cap at all, and just sort of leave that to the parties that are involved in that transaction to deal with that outside of ARIN. And finally, should there be consequences for a failure to complete the swap? There have been some concerns expressed about the potential for abuse here. So one thing that's been thrown out is whether or not ARIN should revoke the smaller block that was received if they don't complete the transfer in a certain period of time, or if anyone else has some other ideas about what they think would be appropriate here, or if you think it should just be left to the parties to deal with, we'd like to hear that as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, so basically we're just
finish off.
Basically, we're just looking for some feedback on this question. So we would love to hear from the community on their thoughts here.
So thank you, Amy. Let's move back a slide if we could as well, since I think there was some great questions there. So this is a draft policy, not a recommended draft policy. If we were in the in-person meeting, I'd be showing the ARIN policy and saying we're only up here in the policy process. So this is still early, and the kind of feedback for those new to ARIN is any feedback is great, even just that, specifically focusing on the problem to be solved. So the problem statement, is this a problem that you think the AC should continue to work on? That's great to have. Or if there's any feedback you have on these specific considerations that Amy has raised here in the presentation, that's also. So please either use the Q&A function or raise your hand, and we will start to form a queue here, and we'll have a discussion as long as we have comments. So let us go to our first Q&A then.
All right, our first question comes from Kevin Bloomberg with The Wire. A percentage cap would be much simpler. Time limit is required as it seems like a logical abuse vector. And then he follows it up with, that should be between the parties. Regarding policy, the receiving organization should fall under having received a transfer and not eligible for standard length.
Okay, thank you for that, Kevin. Just also a reminder when you're, especially if you're typing your questions, your name is automatic, but your affiliation is not, and some of them we know, so we do fill in. But if you could try, if you're using the typed Q&A to put your affiliation, we would appreciate it. Next comment, please.
Mike Burns says the penalty should be no further transfers until the swap occurs, and has a follow-up question. Does the large block request this prior to a transfer? Can they do it as part of a pre-approval?
I don't know if Amy wants to, or staff would like to address that from an interpretation standpoint.
John?
Go ahead, John, please. I can't see you, John, so I'm not sure. Go ahead, John.
I was
There you are.
asking John Sweeting if he wanted to comment,
Oh.
but
John Sweeting, I
um,
think will answer then, or I think I'm hearing now.
I'll
Go
take
ahead, John.
Okay, so does the large block request this prior to transfer, or can they do it as part of a pre-approval? Is that the question?
That is the question.
Okay. It's interesting. I mean, the ultimate answer is going to depend on the final language. If it's desirable that they be able to pre-approve that way, we need to know about that, because clearly a swap changes the nature of the approval. If someone is going to do a swap, we don't want to count the space being swapped as part of the approval process. So I would say they could pre-approve a transfer with a swap, but a pre-approval that doesn't involve one may not be applicable.
It does sound though, John, like this would be a good thing for the AC to consider getting clarity on, so that there's no interpretation problems down the road.
Right.
Right.
Very much so. This is a complicated, I mean, there's also a question of importance here. This is a complicated introduction of process that can fail on multiple parties. So we need to understand how important this is to have a policy of this effect.
But this is John Sweeting. I just want to point out though that the pre-approval, I think they're talking about pre-approval, a different type of pre-approval, because the pre-approval usually comes from the recipient. It would be the source that actually wants to get a smaller block to be able to release a larger block. So it would be a totally different process there, I think, for pre-approval. Yeah, it depends on when this becomes to staff or staff and legal review. I don't believe we've done a staff review on this yet, have we, Amy?
You did have a previous version, but we're still playing with the text based on feedback.
Okay. You might want to get that back in front of us again for us to look at after this meeting. Thanks.
Yeah.
And just for the record, Mike Burns, thank you for adding IP trading as his affiliation. So thank you. Let's take our next question, then we'll go to the question, please.
All right, we have Andrew Dull with 8 Continents Networks, ARIN-AC. I don't support the policy as written. I would suggest removing the option of using waitlist space as part of a swap.
Okay, thank you for that, Andrew, and thank you for flagging that. And I'll ask our question person to give me the next one, because there's a bit of misorder here, so I'll leave it to you to take which one.
All right, I believe it's with Mike Burns again. My understanding is the needs test for the small block is avoided if the policy is chosen. Does the buyer of the large block have to be identified in advance? He follows that up with, I want to get a small block, avoid the needs test, and get pre-approval to sell.
I think that's feedback we have to take. I don't know, Amy, if there is some clarity on.
So I think what we're thinking of in terms of the smaller block is that either there would still be a needs justification process in place. It would just either, it might have a cap on the maximum size, but it wouldn't just be an automatic sort of approval for the smaller block. Both sides would be completing a needs justification. And on the smaller side, it would either be capped at, say, an 18 or a 19, or it would just be capped at whatever they would otherwise have been able to establish via needs justification.
Thank you for that. Next
Oh, pardon
question,
me.
let's go.
Our-
Sorry,
Our
next
next
question.
question is from David Farmer, University of Minnesota. I support the concept of the policy. I suggest a percentage limit. I like no other transfers until completed. I would like to see a pre-approval of a swap be part of the policy.
Okay. Thank you for that
Can I
feedback.
ask David a question?
Yes, you can.
Would you like the pre-approval as a requirement? And if so, how does that differ from the normal justification that you would engage in when going through a transfer? How do you like to see that differ?
Dave, if you could take a moment and type that response, and we'll pin that and come back, and let's go to Wendy's question.
All right, Wendy Leedy with Amazon Web Services. Block size should be based on needs with a 24-month time cap. There shouldn't be any consequences from ARIN for failure to meet this time cap.
Okay. And let's do Mike's. I think we haven't done the Mike question yet. Although Mike, I'm having a hard time. Sorry. Mike, you had a question here still, I think 2 points. How can I justify with a largely empty /16? I can't show 50%.
Paul, I can take that real quick.
Sure.
Basically, what you would have to show the need, but if you were wanting to get a /22 so that you could free up your entire 16, you'd have to show us how you are using that /22 currently.
Okay.
That would be the need. It wouldn't be 50% of the entire 16.
Okay, thank you for that one. Can we, that's still David's original question. All right, can we take our next question, please?
All right, our next question is from Gary Geeson, Central Logic, ARIN AC. Undecided on whether I support the policy, but I support its continued development. One, I believe a reasonable cap is required until more experience is gained with the policy, should it be implemented, to reduce risk of abuse, which I believe this policy might be prone to. I think a /19 is reasonable. Renumbering out of anything larger than that in any reasonable time frame may be painful. Two, I believe this should be a time limit. I think 24 to 36 months is reasonable. I believe 3, that some reasonable consequence should occur for failure to complete the transfer. At a minimum, revocation of a smaller block or even the larger block.
Okay, thank you for that feedback, Gary. I think David has given his response now, so can we go back to that?
Absolutely. David Farmer says, I think they have to notify ARIN that they want to make a swap. Otherwise, any time cap is meaningless.
Okay, thank you. Oh, the questions are coming in fast and furious on this one. So let's take our next question or comment.
All right, we have Mike Burns again with IP Trading. My problem is how the small block is justified if the large block is empty.
John Sweeting, did you want to address that?
So Mike, if you are using no IP addresses at all, it would be very difficult to justify that you need to keep some, that you need to get some so you can sell the ones you aren't using. Well, basically, I believe this swap, the purpose of it is for people that are using a smaller piece of a larger block, want to get that smaller piece first so they can renumber out and then sell the larger block. So if you're not using any of that larger block, there's no reason to get a swap that I could see.
Yeah. And Mike indicated actually just a second ago that actually his question was answered. It was just and just the way the questions come up here, I just want to make sure they're addressed pieces. You addressed that previously.
Okay.
There's somebody going by the name Holden. Could you just give us your full name? We're going to get to your question soon. It just didn't come through correctly. Let's go to our next comment or question, which I think is Chris Woodfield.
Yes, Chris Woodfield with Twitter. My take on Mike's question, I think that may depend on the velocity of the market. Assuming there's a reasonable expectation that the party will be able to find a buyer within a certain period of time, then I don't feel that the buyer needs to be identified.
Okay, thanks for that. Next comment, please.
Gwen Newton, not allowing transfers until completed may cause issues for other transfer needs for 2XL organizations.
Thank you. We've got about 10 more minutes, so please feel free to ask your question or to raise your hand if you'd like to speak in real time. Let's go to our next commenter.
Our next commenter is Tina Morris with Amazon Web Services. I'm in favor of formalizing this process. This allows for large aggregated blocks to stay intact and be used by organizations that need space rather than sitting unutilized.
Thank you, Tina, for your feedback. Our next one is from Holden Cavaro. I'm sure I botched it. I apologize. Go
Yes,
ahead, Melissa.
I'm really curious about what folks see as the potential avenues for abuse, and Holden is with Pigskin Fly Labs LLC.
Very amusing entity name. If people have comments on some of the abuse, I think this relates to some of the chat, which doesn't matter the online chat. While it's great for discussion, it's not making it into this meeting. So if somebody wants to raise that or give some examples, we'd be happy to have them. We are, though, however, out of questions, I think, or comments. So I'll give a last opportunity. People either want to raise their hand to speak or ask a question. Amy, is there anything you'd like to add or further comments? Again, noting there's the 3 considerations that she raised, which I don't think we really got too much feedback on some of them. So perhaps that could be a...
Sure, and we'll send around a note on PPML as well if you'd like to just sort of think it over and provide feedback later. Any feedback you'd like would be appreciated.
Yep, you always have the forum to contact the Shepherds, which in this case are Owen DeLong and Amy Potter. You can or approach any member of the ARIN AC offline, or you can send a message to the ARIN public policy mailing list, which I'm sure all of you are subscribed to. However, seeing that there is no one answering, I'm going to make one final call, and then we're going to close our virtual microphone queue, and then we'll be moving on to the next policy. So we'll just give it a couple more seconds, since every time we try and cut it off, it seems to be 1 second too early. While I'm just waiting for this, I really just want to thank you again, Amy, for literally stepping in at the last minute. About 30 seconds to go before the presentation. Is, hey, Amy, can you present a presentation? So thank you for playing the role of Owen DeLong today. We appreciate that. So we'll all virtually give our thanks to Amy for the great presentation. The microphone's now being closed. This is a draft policy, and there's been no poll requested. So the feedback that's been raised will now be passed on to the AC. And I think John is going to introduce us to our next presenter. Thank you, Amy, and go ahead, John.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Paul, for your able moderation.